Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. I know it's been a long 24 hours since we've had a video come out on the channel, but we're back in business for November 6th, 2023. Happy Monday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on this great afternoon. Still seeing a lot of great weather down here in the southeast post-frontal passage, and it looks like it is expected to continue at least for a little bit longer until we get some of that drought relief we were talking about at the end of last week down into our neck of the woods. We have a lot to cover today, nothing too significant as of yet, but I'm definitely going to take you through the weeds and kind of describe everything to the best of my ability. So let's fasten our seatbelts, guys, and get right into it. So first things first, we're starting with our wide view infrared satellite shot. We're looking at North America as well as Central and the northern periphery of South America to include our main development region out in the Atlantic, where you can see quite a bit of thunderstorm activity still firing along that convergent boundary. We also finally saw a full-fledged cyclogenesis of our low pressure that was starting to take shape during our last segment off the southeastern coastline, and it is now propagating further into the Atlantic, dragging with it even more modified polar high pressure off the southeastern coastline, which is why we're predominantly clear across the board for everybody who lives down in the southeast, the Gulf Coast, and the state of Florida. You can also see we still have a large indication of an anticyclone beginning to build. That subtropical ridge is ridging over the deep southern states, the southern tier United States, passing across central Florida as we speak, indicative of our subtropical jet making a return, which is going to help to filter some of that moisture down there in the East Pacific down across the south and hopefully begin to elevate our rain chances. Now, as we transition over to interior parts of the United States, you can see we had our first Baroclinic system working its way due east across the northern tier, moving through the Great Lakes right now, helping to spawn some rain and snowfall and elevated winds with it as it does so, as well as our next Baroclinic feature already making landfall over the Pacific Northwest, and you can see tremendous amounts of cross-barrier flow occurring along the Rocky Mountains, something that we briefed last week before ending the segments for the weekend. This is likely spawning a large, widespread, non-convective wind threat for those of you guys near the Rocky Mountains, especially on the lee of the Rockies, all that cross-barrier flow. You can guarantee we're seeing some pretty good non-convective winds in the form of momentum transfer, that mixing of the winds in the upper levels running perpendicular to the mountain chains and coming down to the surface in way of maybe 30 to 35 knots, depending, of course, with the finite stability parameters we have going on out there. We're not going to get that much into the weeds, but you can definitely see the jet is alive and well. It is very strong for that matter, supporting our Baroclinic feature, driving a lot of the weather activity for most of western CONUS to its entirety outside of maybe the desert southwest. And then, of course, last but not least, it looks like a large majority of our significant thunderstorm activity that was impacting most of Central America has since dissipated, although it does seem like we are still seeing some onshore flow for our folks down there in Belize who unfortunately just can't catch a break. And that's one of the big parameters we're going to talk about in today's segment, because it looks like a resurgence of a lot of widespread thunderstorm activity and potential flooding is likely to take shape here very soon within the next week or so. And I'm definitely digging into the possibilities of seeing maybe not necessarily tropical cyclone formation, but it looks like we could get a well-pronounced area of low pressure down there, helping to feed a lot of that convective instability and drive another round of very heavy rainfall for our folks already dealing with widespread flood conditions from the last event we were just documenting end of last week. We'll talk all about that, guys. Let's go ahead and move forward. All right, we're looking at the 12Z Euro now, and as you can see, every single one of those features we talked about on infrared are verifying very well with our current iteration of the European model. You can see that Baroclinic system moving over the Pac Northwest, upper Rocky Mountain region, providing a lot of lee side troughing. It might be a little difficult for you guys to see on this overlay, but if you look very closely, we have not only our isotherms indicating the temperature gradient, but if you look right along in through this general area, you can see that that perpendicular wind component in the mid to upper levels of the environment is crossing the Rocky Mountains pretty dramatically, and as such, we're seeing that lee side troughing indicating that we are getting the lowering pressure on the lee of the Rockies, which is textbook for that downsloping wind, that non-convective wind threat I was telling you about when we were discussing the satellite image. On top of that, the rest of the United States is predominantly under fair weather. You can see we have a very strong warm sector right in through here, driving a lot of that return flow out of the Gulf into the southern United States and into the plains. This is exactly why we're going to see a warming trend over the next several days for much of us down in the south, interior parts of central United States, as well into the Appalachian and mid-Atlantic regions as that continues to move further to the north. If you take this through time, that boundary, that warm air advection, that movement of our tropical air is what's going to help to provide us with enough instability and good moist air for when that next cold boundary comes down. We're going to see a full ignition of widespread thunderstorm activity right about there, firing off on the 9th of November and continuing on with that next frontal system, hopefully sweeping across the Gulf Coast to its entirety and into the state of Florida. This is definitely going to help to alleviate a lot of those severe drought conditions, and I'm rooting for this, guys. It looks like we have the return flow and the moisture available. I'll show you that here in a moment, and it looks like our next pungent punch of cold cold air is going to help to ignite that along the sharpest area of temperature discontinuity. We're going to look at tropical tidbits now. We're going to use our 850 temperature anomaly overlay here so you can see that distinguishing line of temperature gradient as that next frontal system comes down. So if you look down over the Gulf of Mexico, we have that modified air beginning to work its way out, and then you can see all those red shades indicative of what's called warm air advection, or the movement of warmer air from the south to the north, which is where I was highlighting that warm front on the surface chart a second ago. Here's that next real big slab of polar air coming across the Rockies, moving out into the central and southern plains, and right about there is where we're anticipating a large ignition, a large influx of thunderstorm activity right along that sharpest gradient. I can go ahead and draw it for you guys. You can see a textbook boundary between our tropical equatorial air surging to the north and all this modified polar air sinking in across the interior parts of CONUS. You come on over to our precipitable water chart and you can see it even more clear. As that area of temperature discontinuity ignites, you can see that we are expecting our precipitable water values, or just the amount of rainfall we can expect down there, starts dramatically going up as we go through the 9th and all the way through into the 11th and the 12th, and continues on for that matter, trying to get all the way across the deep south with even more vigorous return flow happening across the Gulf, which is good news. Hopefully this means the southeast and especially the Gulf Coast states along the coastline particularly are going to get some good and much needed rainfall. And once again, guys, we mentioned this in our last couple segments before rounding out the weekend. You can see a large increase in our precipitable water amounts down there over the Yucatan and Central America, kind of what I was highlighting on the satellite imagery. We are still expecting some sort of a tropical feature to try to take shape, but I don't think we're going to have the necessary ingredients to see something full-fledged cyclone come out of that. Now, moving right into that next piece of the segment, these are our 0Z probabilities. Unfortunately, 12 Zulu hasn't fully populated yet, otherwise I would show you guys. And as you take this through time, right out of the gate, 4 days out, you can already see our tropical depression probabilities going up in the southern Caribbean. This has been a trend for the last few days, but we've been very, very on and off in terms of how high these probabilities want to go or how low they're going to sink back down with every 0 and 12 refresh of the European model. You take this through to 120 hours and then 144 hours, 5 days out, and you can see we're sitting at about a 30% probability of some kind of a tropical depression or at least a low pressure area forming in the southern Caribbean. And then once again, this has also been an ominous trend in our model for the last several days now, even before we ended last week. You could see right about at the 17th of November into the 18th, this has been an indication on our Euro probabilities for a while now. The only thing that I disagree with is the fact that it stays at the very end of our ensemble loop. This hasn't propagated forward in time. As those probabilities go up and you get closer and closer to that cardinal hour, notice that our probabilities kind of stay fairly low, but the strongest are at the very back end of the run. So it looks like the Euro does agree we have some favorable conditions out there to spawn something in, but it's not highly confident that we're going to get a full-fledged cyclone, let alone a named storm down there. So we're still interrogating, still investigating. There's a lot of agreement in our operational models that we'll see an area of low pressure, increased rainfall down there, which is already bad enough given the severe flood conditions we had to deal with down there over the last several days of last week. These are, in fact, our 12Z Euro ensembles, the mean sea level pressure ensembles, and as you take this through time, there is some agreement that we could get some kind of an organized low pressure down there. You can see one member spawning in, moving off to the north and eventually the north-northeast, with a couple of other members trying to get behind this. Nothing too crazy, nothing to significantly identify that we are going to get a named system down there. More or less another disorganized area of low pressure, very reminiscent of Invest 97L, at least as the Euro calls it right now. But then take a look across the United States as the back end of these ensembles, you can see a large area of lowering pressure, possibly indicative of our next El Nino system trying to come down and add to our rainfall accumulation after we get that first run we were highlighting on the mean sea level pressure chart. Now here's our 12Z GFS ensembles, and the reason I kind of do this with my hands is because I don't really trust the operational model of the GFS. It tries to form up a full-fledged hurricane, punch it straight into a very, very strong line of upper-level wind shear, keep it organized before moving due east across all of our greater Antilles, and then it immediately backpedals due west, back over top the mountains in rapid succession. So I don't really think that's exactly what's going to play out. I think the GFS is in agreement with the Euro that we could possibly see some kind of a low pressure form up, albeit I definitely think it's going to stay on the weak side and be just another rainmaker for areas who really don't need it. So that's why we're putting a lot of emphasis on this and tracking it out, because it looks like those areas that were susceptible to flooding last week could see another round of very bad flooding flooding or more accumulation, for that matter, to all that standing water out there. And guys, the main reason I want to emphasize this so much is not necessarily the flooding itself. If we can't get that water out of there or let the lingering water, that standing water, recede as it is, we're losing livestock down there. We're losing crops. Their economy is going to suffer. And let's not forget the infestation of bugs and insect life that come with standing water. The mosquitoes and other disease carriers out there is very bad news for our guys down there. So that's why I'm paying a lot of attention to this, regardless of if we get a named storm or not. Anyways, very fast, you take the GFS through the ensembles and you can see a lot of agreement still coming out of the Caribbean, albeit everywhere you look. Some members want to take it into the Gulf, which is what we saw end of last week. A lot of the main runs want to take it across the islands into the Atlantic, which is reminiscent of what we typically see our hurricanes do down there if they do get going. But as you can see, there really isn't a whole lot of confidence of what that entity, if any entity, wants to do. You have members going out like this, some going out like so, others trying to track straight into the Gulf, and with that subtropical jet out there trying to deepen and come down further to the south, you can best believe our shear is going to be very, very strong, which is not going to allow a major hurricane that the GFS is predicting to take shape. Finally, we're looking at our operational 12Z Euro run, and this is a lot more realistic. As you take this quickly through the loop, you can see our area of low pressure starting to form with the influx of moisture from that ITCZ out, down, and over the MDR, as well as over northern South America. That's kind of where I've been watching more so than anything. The East Pac and northern South America with our copious daytime thunderstorms that have been firing day to day to day, adding to our overall moisture content and our relative humidity for the Caribbean source region. As you get towards the end of the loop, you can see a little bit of a low pressure starting to form and then moving across the Yucatan, dying as it does so before getting wrapped up in our next major frontal system, and that next system I'd mentioned on the Euro ensembles trying to take shape over the Gulf Coast. So all in all, guys, with that high pressure down the road, even if that system does not survive, Lord willing it doesn't develop into something big for our guys down there in Central America and the Yucatan, it will help to add to our moisture content and our rainfall expectancy over the south and the southeast United States. Down there, unfortunately, I wish there was a way we could take it away, but it looks like you're in for another round of heavy rain here coming very soon. Last but not least is our 12Z Canadian model, just to show you that there is a little bit of evidential reinforcement in terms of what we're expecting. You can see the Canadian model is anticipating that next frontal line to bring with it increased rain chances for the Gulf Coast especially. It might not make it through Florida as of yet, which is why, if you remember a few videos ago, I mentioned that the GFS trying to take a cyclone out of the Caribbean and push it towards Florida would actually be beneficial, because I don't think it'd be very strong. It'd be very disorganized with a lot of our subtropical jet wind shear down there, but it would help to give us really good and much needed rain for the Florida Peninsula, as well as some of the other areas on the Gulf Coast, depending on where it would have tracked. That is since washed out, and we're not really anticipating that based on our current model iterations. But as you get towards the very end of this model run, you could see a large area of not only rainfall for the Gulf Coast in the Gulf of Mexico with that next potential system, but an increase in overall shower and thunderstorm activity for the Caribbean and the Yucatan, Central America landmass. So unfortunately, it looks like it's inevitable that we're once again going to be tracking a flash flood risk for our folks down there, starting at about the 9th and all the way through from the 9th all the way to about November 16th, and even beyond that, with the introduction of our next frontal system bringing extra moisture from the north down with it. So this will wrap up today's segment, guys. Very short, abbreviated, and sweet, but I highlighted a lot of the areas we're tracking for some potential maybe moderate to severe weather activity. Tonight we'll discuss a little bit more of what's going on down there in the tropics for our 8 p.m. Tropics talk tonight. You don't want to miss it. There's not a whole lot to talk about, and I'm not really forecasting we're going to see a major named system out of whatever's going on down there, but it is worth investigating, and we'll once again explore all possibilities tonight in that live segment. Once again, guys, I thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you to all my new subscribers, and for those of you who've been around for day one, I genuinely appreciate all of you as we roll into the fall and in the winter time as we continue with our abbreviated segments and hopefully roll out some new content as we go towards the holidays. Well, hopefully we'll see you tonight at 8 p.m., but until next time, guys, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.